So much of our 21st century lives are mediated by screens. With TVs, laptops, phones, and tablets, we can do nearly anything and go nearly anywhere, and not just virtually. This is the result of the development of cyberspace, defined by the National Institute of Standards and Technology as the complex environment resulting from the interaction of people, software, and services on the internet by means of technology devices and the networks connected to it. Think services and apps like Amazon, Instagram, Zoom, Snapchat, Uber Eats, etc. As the reach of cyberspace grows with each passing day, we find ourselves living in an unprecedented era of digital hyperconnectivity. In many ways, cyberspace has reduced the need for physical, face to face human interaction, replaced our bodies with infinite screens. When so much of our social identities are, and historically have been, determined by the way we present our physical bodies in the physical spaces we inhabit, what happens when we take that away? Pascal Plante's Red Rooms and Jane Schoenbrun's We're All Going to the World's Fair both represent answers to this question of cyberspace, of what happens when digital realities dominate our frameworks for social interaction and identity. Casey, the protagonist of We're All Going, is a teenager living in a vaguely rural town who begins to play an online role-playing horror game via a site much like YouTube. Red Rooms follows Kelly Ann, a 20-something model who lives in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, as she begins to obsessively attend the public, high-profile court case of a serial killer, a man who killed and tortured 3 teenage girls, and filmed it for a live audience in what is termed Red Rooms on the dark web. Both characters' experiences within cyberspace reveal the dual nature of online spaces, offering connection and validation, while also facilitating manipulation and harm, functioning as a vehicle for the creation of identity, as well as its destruction. Ultimately, the screen becomes an entry point for transformation of the self, an invitation to find or to lose yourself in fiction, as Jane Schoenbrun, director of We're All Going, puts it, both for the characters and for ourselves. Throughout the films, cyberspace is showcased as a conduit for both loneliness and connection. In We're All Going, Casey immerses themselves in a role-playing game built upon a creepypasta called the World's Fair Challenge. Participants are instructed to play the World's Fair video on their computers, smear blood on the screen, and chant "I want to go to the World's Fair" 3 times. Though, most players aren't physically transported in this way. Instead, their bodies change. They are made into something else. Casey films themselves completing this challenge and posts it to YouTube. They spend much of their time in the following scenes, online, watching others, wishing to be changed, and soon begin to make videos of their own. The camera becomes both spectator and friend, witness, and comfort as they embark upon their transformative journey into the World's Fair. The community built around this game offers them a space to connect in an external world that feels cold and empty, wrecked by grief and disconnection. An abandoned Toys R Us, dozens of cars driving on the highway, going and coming but never stopping, a father whose presence is ghostly at best, and a mother who is entirely absent. For Casey, cyberspace is an escape from this nothingness, a haven of like-minded people in which they find acceptance and belonging, finding comfort in the fact that they aren't alone. Conversely, Kelly Ann's experience online is one of further isolation rather than community. Throughout the film, the only room in her apartment we see is the living room, where there is a desktop setup as well as sparse decorations, most of which are barely visible in the darkness. The space, though decorated, feels bare, functionally absent of any human presence, a reflection of Kelly Ann's isolation. She has designed her life to be economical, practical, no frills, no friends. Her computer is its center point. She invests in her online presence above everything else. Unlike Casey, for Kelly Ann, the internet isn't a place to find community with others. Online, Kelly Ann is a faceless and emotionless competitor and consumer buyer, not a friend or fandom member or content creator, simply a disembodied voyeur. In his article, Mobility, Portability, and Placelessness, Joseph H. Kupfer explains that electronically produced experience is isolating. The disembodied connections of cyberspace remove us at once from the social sphere and the inner life. We are displaced from other people and from ourselves. Kellyanne's own disembodiment is palpable throughout the film. It often feels as though the world beyond her two monitors is a chore, including her own body. However, there's a moment in the film where things shift temporarily for Kellyanne, where a character breaks the bubble of isolation that surrounds her. During the trial, she meets another young woman, Clementine, who romanticizes the murder and professes its innocence. Since Clementine is visiting from out of town, Kellyanne invites her to stay at her apartment. Kellyanne is at her most lively in these scenes, laughing and smiling with Clementine as they make conversation and jokes. Her apartment also becomes more lively, no longer plunged into the constant darkness of cyberspace. Then, however, it is revealed that Kellyanne has sourced and seen the victims' torture videos, and Clementine demands to watch them. After some convincing, Kellyanne agrees. She draws the curtains closed, plunging them back into darkness, and then plugs in the USB stick. It is immediately clear that Kellyanne has watched the videos countless times, studying the murderer himself. It is also clear that this will be the end of their friendship. Kellyanne has introduced Clementine to a digital underworld beyond her tolerance, and shattered her belief in the murderer's innocence. Kellyanne's desensitized, dehumanized perspective, a result of her time in extreme online spaces, has sabotaged her chance of any connection at all, online or otherwise. This conversation around community and isolation within online spaces brings us to the question, how does cyberspace affect these characters' relationship to their physical environment? How are their identities online different from their identities in the real world? Both Casey and Kellyanne experience a rupture between their virtual and real selves, the development of a digital double, as Stephen Holmes calls it in his article, toward a general theory of digital identities, overlooking Serial Experiments Lane. The figure of the double, or doppelganger, in popular media often provides context and relief for the problems of an individual's psyche or ego. The double functions as a release from psychological repression and an outlet for the expression of deep-set fears and desires. The digital double functions much the same, except that it is birthed and maintained within cyberspace. But while it lacks physicality, it is very much capable of influencing the real world. For Casey, the digital double is an escape, a persona they take on to safely express themselves. After completing the World's Fair challenge, they begin to adopt odd behaviors, sensations, and urges foreign to their real self. At one point, when describing their World's Fair symptoms to another player, they say, "It's like I can feel myself leaving my body. Like it's making me someone else." Despite this seeming detachment, as a viewer, it feels as though Casey's time online actually brings them into their body. Later in the film, they record a video called Losing Control of Myself, where they perform karaoke, dancing and singing energetically, when suddenly, this double is an outlet for Casey. Their emotions, the grief bubbling under the dirt in their backyard, under their feet, the grief that haunts nearly the entire film but goes unuttered and unacknowledged. Perhaps this temporary lapse in the body, this feeling of being overtaken by someone else, allows Casey access to some truer, necessary, angry, and grieving part of themselves, a chance to experiment with who they are and who they want to be, to feel whatever they need to feel whenever they need to feel it. Kellyanne's digital double materializes as her anonymous, voyeuristic online presence, which simmers beneath her manicured outward appearance. After her second day attending the trial, she returns to her apartment and begins to stalk Francine, the mother of one of the victims, Camille, on Facebook, using that information to then hack into Francine's home security system. One could argue that her visit to Francine's home does not take place in the real world at all, as we understand it at least, but rather functions as an extension of cyberspace for Kellyanne, who uses the external environment merely as a prop to further her own obsession. Despite being physically located at Francine's home, Kellyanne isn't actually there, so to speak, Despite being obsessed with Camille's murder, she couldn't care less about the memorial she stands in front of. This dehumanization of others, as well as disconnection from them, is part of what Stephen Holmes calls the empathy problem. The empathy problem stems from the dissonance between the artificiality of digital representation and the conventional mechanics of empathy. The digital double has little, if any, access to physical, interpersonal cues from real people, leading to a distorted version of empathy. Killian's obsession with the murder victims, particularly Camille, could be understood as a strange, incomplete sort of empathy. She is seemingly seeking to understand and share the feelings of these girls as though she herself were one of them, but it is a cold, uncaring, almost fetishistic empathy, if empathy at all. Holmes explains that in cyberspace, while people might think that they understand the feelings of others, in actuality, they are likely in tune with a warped caricature instead, and even then are often unable to translate that apparent understanding into caring for others. Rather than empathizing with these girls, Killian's actions reflect objectification. This becomes especially evident later in the film when she shows up to court dressed as Camille, based on a photo of her displayed during the trial in her Catholic school uniform, the same tattered and bloody uniform in which she was abducted and killed. As she is forcibly removed from court, she stares feverishly at the murderer, willing him to acknowledge her, acknowledge Camille. When his eyes finally meet hers, Killian has brought her digital double out of anonymity and into the real world to be seen, noticed by the murderer, the way Camille and the other victims were, the way she's imagined over and over in the red hue of her screen. She has collapsed the boundary between her fantasies and reality. There is a parallel scene in both films that feels essential to understanding what makes cyberspace so enticing for these characters. They both stare unblinkingly into the light of their computer screens, waiting for something. In the scene from We're All Going, Casey gazes hopefully, expecting to be whisked away to the World's Fair in the bright, multicolored nascent glow of the screen. Conversely, in the scene from Red Rooms, Kellyanne is willingly pulled into the deep, seductive hue of the Red Room, excitement playing on her lips as she takes in the carnage. The glow is tantalizing, an entry point to a whole other world, a whole other way of being. In an interview with Steve Erickson of Cineast, Jane Schoenbrunn, director of We're All Going, says this: "Everything on the internet is just a tool we created to get something or show something of ourselves." Casey and Kellyanne stare into the abyss, and the abyss stares back, inviting them to become something else, something strange or foreign or disturbing, but maybe also something they've always been.